Hello and welcome to the latest Science of Sport podcast. I'm your host, Matt Solomon, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Hyde. So Andy works with elite youth and senior soccer players, and he does that through his company, Aesthetic Athletics. He's also worked at the NHS as a strength and conditioning coach, and he's worked with the Leeds United Ladies Academy, which makes him the perfect person today to discuss how you can improve the efficiency of your week in elite football. So without further ado, it's time to welcome Andy onto the show. So Andy, welcome to the Science of Sport podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us, mate. So can you give us a quick introduction as to who you are and what you've been up to until now?
Yes, so my name is Andy. I'm a strength and conditioning coach from Manchester in England, and I work with football players. So I work with youth players in elite academies, and I work with senior players as well, ranging from semi-pro to the elite level. Previously, I've worked with Leeds United, worked with the Girls Academy, and I also worked in the NHS as well as a strength and conditioning coach. That was a real role, by the way. You know, the badge actually said strength and conditioning coach.
That's kind of like assisting end stage rehab, physiotherapy, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, mate, that could be quite early. That could be like from 12 weeks onwards, like post ACL rehab for like a football player, let's say. And yeah, of course, I've worked with Science for Sport, and I've done some projects with Catapult as well around some like field-based work for football players. And yeah, I did my degree and my master's at Leeds Beckett, and that's brought me to where I am now. Yeah,
absolutely fantastic, mate. So obviously we're here to discuss football, and specifically how players can then plan their week to get the best out of the training stimuli that they get, right? So obviously you can't just do everything on Monday, Tuesday, and then rest for the rest of the week. There's lots of different physical variables that are in there, and you can plan that to be as efficient, as effective as possible. But before we get into the depths of that, can you take us through what a professional footballer's schedule might look like?
Yeah, so it's a tough question to answer because it really depends on the club, the league and the S&C coach, and not even just within a particular club, but a country and that country's culture. It's like USA, like weights. Argentina or Spain might be like pitch-based circuits. Bosu balls, all that stuff.
Yeah.
In the UK,
see a few of them coming on Instagram. That's great.
Yeah, I had some. I got some stick, but also some support when I did a review of one of those circuits, like a voiceover a few weeks ago. It was interesting. But then UK, you might have like the French boss and the hip lock, hip lock side of things. So yeah, it really does depend, and that's why it's hard to kind of give an example of a typical week, especially with different competitions throughout different countries. But I think the one thing that we could look at in common is around a game day. No matter what, all the teams have game days, and they have the day before a game and the day after a game. And for the pro clubs, it's very different for me, for example, working with them privately. The pro clubs will have a lot of contact with them. So let's say like match day was a Saturday in a Prem. And match day -1, for example, you would expect to have something like a primer where you might have some higher impact plyometric work, but it would be really low volume. You'd have some ballistic work just to fire up the nervous system. Probably wouldn't have any strength work. I know some coaches now would probably use isometric type work, for like that rate of force development side of things. But personally, I don't use it. And then you're probably just going to have some general upper body strength as well. Not to the point where it's like taxing the nervous system, because it is all load on the nervous system. You want them to be fresh for the game, but anywhere from kind of 24 to 48 hours from the game, you might expect to see that. Sometimes even the morning of the game. But I think, that's kind of general. You might see that in any sport. But I think what's more interesting is what's done after the game. So let's say you have starters or players that have played 90. Then you might have players that didn't start, played 45 or less, or didn't play. It's interesting to see what's done after the game in top pro clubs. So those that played or more than 45 or 90 or started, their day's done after that. Whereas the ones that didn't, they're probably going to do a top up session where you might get something like some high speed running exposure to start with to get the overall volume in. And then sometimes they might even do, some clubs might do top speed work before that and do it fresh to get that highest kind of neural output. Some clubs might do it after the high speed running to do it under fatigue. And then they might throw into some small sided games to get the technical and tactical work in there, to change your directions, decels, XLs. And mate, that could be done right after the game. I've seen that done on the pitch, like in the stadium at like Arsenal, let's say. The other way to do it is a day after, because that training session, that top-up session wouldn't exceed the demands of the actual game itself. You could get away with doing it the morning after, and then they would still have a similar recovery timeline to the players that played 90, like the day before. And then what it allows the clubs to do is do like medical checks and, put recovery protocols in place for the players that did play. Obviously, there's a caveat there, because if someone's played 90 the day before, you don't want to get them up at 8 a.m. to come and do recovery. Just fucking have a lie-in. But so there's obviously caveats to it. But, then the actual coaches, the technical coaches might want to do reviews of the game. So this is where you have to look at like the actual, the structure of the club. But, in terms of, let's say, contrast that to semi-pro, they usually train on a Tuesday and a Thursday evening and they play on a Saturday. And apart from that, they're kind of left to their own devices. So that's where someone like myself might come in to help with senior players a little bit more. And it's a tough one for the semi-pro players, to be honest, because, some of them are in full-time setups. Some of them are working alongside that. So, they might have to do gym sessions in the evenings, and we'll get into that later on in terms of like what a typical week might look like for them. But in terms of like youth players, now they can have midweek games, they can have Sunday games, they can have tournaments, they can have trips abroad where, like Manchester City are playing like PSG and like Barcelona somewhere. You've got like the Kevin De Bruyne Cup, let's say. Don't know if you've heard of that, but that's a pretty cool cup. But I don't actually think the week should be too structured. Not in the sense of it shouldn't be well managed, like stakeholders in terms of the club that they're at, let's say the academy and the let's say the other sport they sample throughout the week, and maybe if they go to like an athletic development class. I'm not saying that these stakeholders shouldn't, take care with the players, but I don't think it should be too structured like a senior player would have. And I think that, with the younger age groups, if you try and prepare too specifically, then they're not good generally. And I think at that age, you want to be like a jack of all trades, and then eventually you can be a master at one. But yeah, I think in terms of that, I think in between the training with the club, just balancing out what they do. So, if they're training 3 times a week, they do an extra session with a private coach, they do an athletic development class, then maybe take them swimming one day and take the load off the legs, or maybe like kickboxing or boxing. And I believe that, just to touch on the youth development stuff a little bit, it's like learning another language in terms of doing another sport, so your brain can speak your main sport better. We touched on it before we started recording with, let's say kickboxing and or MMA, and the ability to hold your body or stand on one leg stably. So yeah, for those kind of players, you wouldn't begin to look at specializing and looking at the weekly structure properly until they're around, maybe between the ages of 14 to 19. And that's when you start to add intensity and intent.
Yeah, so it's a really nice little overview of how that goes through different like qualities and standards. So when you've got that weak structure, so maybe less structured for youth and more structured for professional, when you've got that structure, what are the key sessions which you're going to use to fill that? So what do you need to work on throughout the week in order to optimize performance?
So I think for me, one of the most, I would call it a non-negotiable personally, is this one kind of doesn't count, but it's body composition. Just first of all, absolute basics. Yeah. You need the body composition to be able to just move and run and turn and perform highly and just deal with sport. In football anyway, obviously that's going to differ in rugby. And the other thing is then just an aerobic base. You need to be able to run. It's a 90-minute game, and in my opinion, with the amount that players are training and playing now at those younger ages that we just mentioned, that base should really be developed and kind of continue to progress as the playing time and the pitch dimensions step up as they get older, as they play and train. of course they're going to develop it doing other sports. Maybe if they try swimming or like, they go out on the bike, let's say. But honestly, I don't think if you're playing at a good level, by the time you get into the senior levels, you shouldn't need to be worried about doing extra running because you need to like catch up. Obviously in the off season and in the pre-season, I think Dan Baker's been on here before and said that in terms of, that minimum effective dose you need to be getting in at least, I think it was like 10 minutes of mass a week to kind of.
Yeah, it could be. So I think Bouchard recommends something like between 8 and 16 above a certain intensity to improve aerobic performance.
Yeah. And then another one I'd probably go down in kind of priority order here is max strength. I think just kind of globally football players generally aren't strong enough. They probably don't prioritize that enough. And in terms of force production for being strong in challenges, for projecting the body when they accelerate and sprint, I think for footballers that projection is key. And I think, don't quote me on this, but Matt Rea, and I think this was in a different population. I think this was in like collegiate football athletes. But I think from data he posted on Twitter, he found that like, a 1.7 bodyweight back squat kind of was as much as you need to maximize force production into the ground with like acceleration and sprinting. But I was tagged in a video a few days ago. I think it was me and James Ralph both tagged in a video off an S&C coach of Salah speaking about his training. And he said that he doesn't really focus on weights too much because they will make him bulky and slow him down. He doesn't need that much strength. So, and obviously Salah's, one of the best forwards the Prem seen in a while. So, I'm not bashing Salah here. And like I say, if we look back at the aerobic thing that I touched on in terms of playing enough, he's played football enough generally. And, genetically is obviously not too bad off either, that he can just keep up with the demands of the game anyway. You can't say he's not strong enough or fast enough or fit enough. But the caveat is that maybe if he had got that strength work, not got the strength work right, but if he had tried to optimize his physical performance in the most informed way possible, then maybe he would have had a bit more physically. But it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, does it? It doesn't really matter.
No, but I think it's interesting to think about what the player then sees in that situation, and then what potentially the strength coaches are seeing. And yeah, obviously there's some kind of balance in there as well, right? So
yes,
maybe the player's like, oh, I don't really like that. I don't think it works for me. And on the other hand, the S&C coaches might be like, you know what, he does really need that. Where you kind of drip it in or you put it in without him really noticing. And there's that side of things, which is like a kind of a little game in the gym to kind of get him to do stuff that you think is right. Because I don't for a second think that he does no strength training. But also there's a huge genetic component to that as well, right? So if you're already strong and fast and explosive, like the risk versus reward to do more maybe kind of skewed in a negative way. So I can completely understand that he goes, you know what, I'm super fit. I don't need to get a higher squat level or get a high deadlift or jump higher or whatever. It's not his game.
No, and probably at his age, it's just continuing to be an expert at your sport and just staying match available, just staying healthy, and then moving on, power, you could maybe put elasticity and, the rate of force development from the max strength into that. The only reason that I've said speed, acceleration. So, the rate that you can change your speed and then the fastest speed you can get to is because players are already sprinting a lot in the game. And again, I think that max strength side of things is undervalued. But yeah, I think players should be getting at least one top speed session in a week somewhere. And then in terms of agility, players develop a lot of that training and just playing the game anyway. But again, there are still, like you said, games-based approaches that you can use to develop that in different ways. And apart from that, mate, honestly, for football players, like the upper body stuff is just general strength, isn't it? To be honest, you don't need to consider it like you do for a rugby player.
Yeah, logical. I think as long as you're not like Salah said, as long as you're not too bulky and it slows you down, then you're probably all right.
There we go.
So when we've got all of these physical qualities that you just mentioned, which is just a huge range of great things that everyone wants to have, like obviously you need to structure that into a week. So how do you go about planning that to be efficient and effective? Because you can't just, of course, do loads of max strength training and then play the next day.
Yeah. So if it's the off season, then, for me, this is the time to, because, in the off season, you're only going to get 4 to 6 weeks anyway. Just prioritize a little bit of your physical performance there, and just go hard with it where you can. Because in the preseason, really now you can't, because there's that much technical and tactical training, and in season you can't. So let's say we were looking at in season, and let's say again we'll just take that semi-pro setup, because we know that that's kind of a standard weekly structure of Tuesday, Thursday training and Saturday game. Coming into Monday, there could very well still be some neuromuscular fatigue there. Sometimes it can take up to 3 days for players to fully recover. So honestly, on a Monday, I would just go in and do an upper body session, just to allow that full recovery to take place. Just go in and hit that general upper body strength. Just get something in. And then if you go on to Tuesday, that's now match day +3. So you get your match day +3 on a Tuesday and then -3 on a Wednesday. Those are going to be your best 2 days to do something in the gym with intent and intensity. So that's where I'd actually be looking at doing some plyometric work with higher impacts and top speed. Get that in earlier in the week when you're going to be a little bit fresher. And then you can get that. Sorry, you can get that in. I had a cold last week and it's still hanging around. You can get that in. You can get that in before training. So you can actually have. So Monday's been a low day, and then Tuesday can be a high day, where you've got a double session. You're going to do some plyos and top speed, and then you're going to train with your club. But you can get it in before, and then it means that Wednesday can be a little bit of a lower day. You can still get something in, but just not something that's going to be taxed into your neuromuscular system like the day before was. So that's maybe where you can get, a little bit of a low intensity mass in, get that minimum effective dosing, and then you could even have you could even have that day off. If it was me, I'd probably have that day off. And on Thursday, you've got match day -2. That's where I think you can hit some lower body strength. Plyos in terms of intensity would probably be a little bit lower than what you'd have on the Tuesday, but you can definitely get some low volume strength work in there. And again, that's going to be one of your high days. And then Friday will be a low day. So again, there I wouldn't even do a primer. I would just do an upper body session. And then you can go into Saturday ready to go. There is obviously different ways you can do that. On a Monday, you could do a full, especially if you stuck for time on a Monday, you could do a full body session. Just the overall volume on the lower body would have to be lower, and it would probably have to facilitate recovery, rather than actually trying to drive adaptation in some ways. So that's where the caveats come in, because then you could do a session on a Wednesday, then you could do a prime on a Friday, but then that means that in a sense, you've had training Tuesday, Thursday, you've probably gone heavy on the Wednesday, match day -3, and you've kind of, those high days have kind of been on the balance maybe a little bit too much. But yeah, I think as well, when some coaches, they kind of bash players in terms of get them off the ball for a minute, they need more strength. And I agree, they need to be stronger. But really, let's take someone like Rodri, for example, at the minute, just because he's smashing AC and he's in his prime, in my opinion. It's completely position dependent in terms of do they need more and more and more of that physical performance? Like what I said, and how we spoke about with Salah, what I said there, they're only hitting lower body one day a week on a 1 game week. But Rodri, when you think of him, he's not like an athletic god by any means. And obviously this is position dependent. He plays like a CDM role, but he's just good at his sport. He's a PhD, he's an expert at his sport. And obviously if you're playing on the wing and you're like Mbappe, that's obviously a different story. But I just think that needs to be considered as well. And just in season, how much are you actually kind of on these players for not doing enough strength work or not doing enough of this or enough of that?
I think it's difficult, right? So obviously there's no one answer, because of the demands of the week are so big. The key thing is to recover in time. So it's really difficult to say, they need to do A, B, and C extra. It's definitely possible, but I think people quickly make the mistake of thinking they need to do a serious low body session. So it's 3 or 4 exercises and hit all of the muscle groups, all of that kind of stuff. It's maybe just a couple of sets, you'll be all right. The volume, if it's low enough, you can recover from. And the intensity, as long as it's high enough to get a stimulus, but low enough to recover from. If you can play with those variables, I think there's definitely something to be said for doing some kind of low level work there. But what you just mentioned was interesting, right? So in a 2-game week, what are the differences? So you've just taken us through a week where there's obviously Saturday. Let's say you go Saturday and you got Champions League on Wednesday. What's the difference there in terms of how you're going to structure those training sessions, or if you're going to include them?
Yeah. So we will go. We'll go with the semi-pro setup again. Actually, no, this could be a pro setup too, because there's Champions League games on a Tuesday, so we'll just use that as an example. Mm-hmm. And I know that because when I'm playing my 7-a-side on a Tuesday night and it's a low turnout, I know, it's cancelled. I know there's a Champions League game on a Tuesday night and people don't want to play and sit here playing. But so again, we have that Monday, which is match day -2, but it's match day +2, but also -1.
Yeah.
So, there could actually be a little bit of neuromuscular fatigue hanging around. So that's where I'd actually put some plyos in there, but they would be low intensity plyos. And quoting Matt McKins-Watson here, these would be like deep tier or kind of low ceiling plyos where, to be honest, they're probably going to just increase blood flow to the legs and mobilize like the hips and knees and just make the place feel a little bit looser. But it's also a nice opportunity to get in a little bit of work where you're going to improve the yield from certain muscles and tendons at a low intensity, basically.
What kind of exercise are we thinking about there? Because you said obviously deep tier, but that might not mean much to some people. So what does that mean?
Yes, apologies. So a very basic example is like a low jump squat. So the way I'd explain it is maybe you hold a really light medicine ball. You don't have to, but maybe like a 2 to 3 kilo medicine ball. You could hold it at your chest or down at your hips, and you're going to squat down as low as you can. And then you're going to basically frog hop up and down as bouncy as possible. And essentially, I imagine your mum and dad are asleep in like a bed in the next room. You're going to try and just bounce across the landing as if you try not to wake them up. So it's super light, super submax, plyometric work, longer ground contact times, deeper ranges of motion, where the quads, the glutes, and maybe even depending on how you set the technique up, the hamstrings are going to be working a little bit more. The tendons will still be working as well, but it's super low impact. And I find that when I do them with players, I do them at the start of sessions because it makes them feel kind of loose and ready to go. And it gets the blood flowing a little bit too. So on a match day +2 -1, I'd be looking at incorporating some of that stuff to actually promote recovery. And then I'd just be going, maybe some coaches would use some isos to dose in a bit of strength work, but I personally wouldn't. I'd just go into some upper body work. And then Tuesday game, Wednesday off. You've had a congested period from Saturday to Tuesday there. And then I'd wait until Thursday. So there you're a match day +2 and -2. That's going to be your best day in that week to get some higher intensity plyometrics and lower body strength working. Now, obviously, the caveat is that I said some fatigue could still be hanging around at that point. So it depends on the individual and, how many minutes they've played and how well they've recovered in terms of how much you do, in terms of volume and intensity. And then Friday, I'd be hitting an upper body session and I won't be doing any primers. And then you'd go back into your game Saturday.
So that's a much more difficult week to plan, right? Like the recovery component is just way larger, and you've got 2 big red days or the intense days of the games, but also then you've got to kind of like shift all of the other stuff down a level to be able to recover for that.
Yeah.
So if we were to walk through like what you would do, then could you take us through how you go through a gym-based session with a footballer to improve one aspect that we talked about? So, for example, either power or speed or strength. Like, how would you take them in the gym in one of these settings, so in either a double game week or a single game week, to improve some kind of aspect of physical performance?
Yeah, so we'll go with let's say a Thursday session, where it's either match day +2 and -2, or if it was a 1 game week, it's match day -2. So some of this is going to look quite general in terms of, some of it could be done by any any athlete or any player. It's not like, this is just for a footballer. This is just kind of how you need to structure the week for an athlete to manage load and be game ready. But personally, I like to start with a flow. I know we spoke about these before. In this part of like the session, I get to catch up with the player because it's that easy for them to do. They can have a little bit of a conversation whilst they're doing it. It's not taking their breath away. We can catch up on how they're feeling in more detail than a phone call or a conversation prior to the session, which just with life now is quite hard to do that stuff well and with substance over like text. Again, we're promoting blood flow, just getting them mentally ready and just kind of loosening them up for the session. And then I always ask them, like, how do your legs feel 1 to 5? Generally, it's like how well recovered do you feel? And then that'll inform if I change any exercises or if we adjust the volume or the intensity a little bit. And then again, I'll go into those low or deep plyometrics to start off with, just to get them loose and ready for the higher intensity stuff to come. So we'd also do some light plyos there. So this is going to be stuff where this could be shorter ground contact times versus the low and the deep stuff. But it's just light here in terms of, let's say you were doing a pogo, you're at a lower intensity, so you're working on like your posture and your ability to reflex off the floor a little bit quicker and your ability to anticipate the ground, rather than going for those max outputs where you might not be ready to do that yet. Then after that, I use something called a skill challenge. So we do it after the jumps because they're usually a little bit more fired up to do it. And this is where it's just like, this is the time just to get off the weights and get off the football and just, or running and something like that, and just do something random to challenge you as an athlete in a different way, but also improve your ability to learn new skills by learning new skills, and just keep a bit of that child in there. So this could be something like a handstand, a kip up off the floor, something from capoeira, like a macaco. I could give them a medicine ball and say, right, lie on your back. You can't take either hand off the ball. You've got to figure out like as many ways as you can to stand up. Without taking your hands off the ball, basically. I could ask them to do put them against the wall and say, right, walk down the wall with your hands into a crab. So, just something random. It's a little bit of fun. And then after that, we actually go into the game speed stuff. So this is where now, they've warmed up, they've done the lighter plyos, they've done a skill challenge, and we're getting into the main part of the intent of the session here. And the game speed stuff, this is kind of a concept that I think he's done a course, and I think he's been on the podcast. Is it Jason? I don't know how you say his second name. Jason Fairheller, something like that.
Yeah.
He does the game speed work. So I've actually adapted a few concepts from him here where in a small space and over smaller distances, and we're dosing in a little bit of like impact and load to the legs, but not too much. We might work, let's say it was a defender, we might work on something like an acceleration where their legs and their torso are separated. So they're running one way and looking the other way as if they're tracking back with a defender. And then they do like a crossover step as if the attacker's gone one way. And then they have to cross over back the other way and decelerate as if they've approached the attacker, basically. So we'll dose in a little bit of that. Again, that has to be managed, and you have to do super low volumes. And oftentimes we're just focusing on technique because before we add intent, because they've had training on Tuesday or a game, and they've got training on a Thursday evening. So you have to be careful about that. And then that's where we'll then do our ping or high intensity plyos or ballistic work. So this could be something like a hop where it's like maybe two forward, one back. So working on that ability to redirect yourself as an athlete. So trying to make it as specific as you can to locomotion in the game. I tend to do less bounding because just running is bounding one foot to the other. So I actually tend to do more, because you've got to pick your exercises wisely and not in abundance. I'll just pick like a hop and then maybe like a 2-footed jump. So maybe like a vertical jump to a broad jump where they're dealing with impact, but they have to redirect themselves in a different way. And again, lower volume with that stuff. Strength work, again, low volume. I'll reduce the range of motion, maybe even put them on one leg to reduce the overall loading demands and like the neuromuscular fatigue, and something like a single leg squat. I don't really use like rear foot elevated in season just because of the DOMs it can produce, and I don't really use back squats either, just unless you've got like that match day +3 or -3, and you've got a really good window. And, we'll do like 2 sets of like, 4 to 5 reps each leg. And then same with something like a primary strength exercise, you'll have one in there like an RDL. Maybe we might do like 1 to 2 sets of like 3 to 5 reps. And, we're leaving reps in reserve as well, somewhere in the 3 plus rep range. Sometimes it can be really high, like 6 reps plus, and just lifting with intent. And then, you just finish off with some core work. Usually I don't go for that anti type work in terms of core. I go for, movement based, so like flexion, lateral flexion, rotation. This could be just general strength. It could be like a contract and relax type exercise, or it could be like linking in. And I've seen you post a little bit of this stuff, especially with the Kaiser machine, kinetic linking from the legs to the trunk. And yeah, that's kind of what a Thursday session might look like.
Absolutely excellent, mate. So before we wrap up, I'm interested to hear if you've got any top tips for young footballers who are looking to improve their physical performance. So could you give us like a 10-second Andy's top tips of what youth footballers can do to improve their performance?
Sample different sports. Don't specialize in football too early. Don't see it as a job, see it as a hobby, and enjoy it.
Perfect. Andy, massive thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure talking. Where can people find a little bit more about you and what you're up to?
My HQ, if you will, is just Instagram, Aesthetic Athletes. That's where I post all of my work. So, yeah.
Brilliant. So, Andy, massive thanks for your time and effort on the podcast. I look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you for having me. Speak soon.
Cheers, buddy.
See you.
And that's it. Once again, a massive thanks to Andy for all of his hard work on today's podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you do at home too. Before you leave, I want to point you in the direction of the Science of Sport Coach Academy. The Coach Academy is an overgrowing library of sports science courses which are broken down into bite-sized chunks. So if you've enjoyed today's podcast and you want to get your hands on some more great sports science information, all you have to do is hit the link in the show notes and you can get into the Coach Academy completely for free for the next 7 days. So hit that link in just a few seconds' time. And of course, if you have enjoyed today's podcast, it'd be fantastic if you could recommend us to a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. That means that we can keep bringing the best possible guests and best possible content. And that's it. Once again, a massive thanks from me. I'm Matt Solomon of Science of Sport, and I'll speak to you next week.